Global National with Dawna Friesen.
This is day 6 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it has become deadlier. The capital city is being targeted, the TV tower in Kyiv hit by a missile. Russia warns it has targets like this in its sights and says people nearby should leave. Ukrainian officials say at least 5 people nearby were killed. And there's a Holocaust memorial nearby where 30,000 Jews were massacred by the Nazis in 1941. Ukraine's president says it was also hit. What's the point of saying never again, he asks, if the world stays silent now? While many are staying to fight, there's a new urgency for others, especially women and children and the elderly, to leave before it's too late. This was Kyiv's train station today. And this was Ukraine's president addressing the European Parliament. Do prove that you are with us, he implores. Do prove that you will not let us go. Do prove that you are indeed Europeans, and then life will win over death. He got a standing ovation. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country is fighting for survival, and the people of Ukraine are fighting back with everything they have. This is Melitopol, a city in the southeast. Civilians shouting occupiers, risking everything as they try to push back Russian military vehicles and face down heavily armed Russian soldiers. And in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, a Russian missile hit the central square this morning, killing civilians. People are hiding, not knowing what Russia will target next. Mike Armstrong begins our special coverage tonight, and a warning: some of the images are disturbing.
These are the first seconds after an explosion in Kharkiv. The man holding the camera says over and over, it's terrible. At one point, he calls the scene Putin's world. This is the heart of Ukraine's second biggest city. It's the home to the regional government offices, a place called Freedom Square. Carrying away a body, a man in this group says, our Russian liberators have come. The moment of the explosion was captured on a surveillance camera. A missile of some kind appears to land just in front of a building. It was enough to almost take it down. It was probably an airstrike, this soldier says. I can't tell for sure. The town's mayor, walking in the rubble, put out a message on social media. The fight continues. Our army is strong, he says. We stand our ground.
And for our freedom.
The Ukrainian president addressed the European Union Parliament Tuesday. Part of his message was about how the attack on Kharkiv's Freedom Square will be remembered. It was enough to bring the interpreter close to tears.
Believe you me, every square of today, no matter what it's called, it's going to be called, as today, Freedom Square in every city of our country. Nobody's going to break us.
Just all the time bombing.
We spoke to this man in Kharkiv. He and his girlfriend are living in an office in a basement. He hadn't gone out for days until today. He helped a group of 5 get out of the city trying to go west. He himself isn't leaving because this is home.
I don't want to be refugee, really. I am not refugee. It's kind of my, I was born here. It's so strange emotion. I don't want to be refugee, really.
Yeah, we started our trip 3 days ago.
Now, there are others who have left, as it turns out, at the last minute. We met this medical student from Lebanon crossing into Poland. He'd been living in Kharkiv until he felt it was too dangerous. He says he was right.
The place where I'm living was totally destroyed, even building where I was living.
Now, if bombings like this one are driving some out, they're also pulling some back. At the same border crossing, a man going in the opposite direction. A Ukrainian returning home to fight. He tells us for one reason. Anger, he says. Now, there were several places in Kharkiv that were hit on this day, according to reports: an airplane factory, apartment buildings, and a blood donation clinic. Nights, for the most part, have been quieter, but that leaves people wondering what the morning might bring. That explosion in the Kharkiv town square happened first thing in the morning, Dawna, almost at first light.
All right, Mike Armstrong in Poland tonight, thanks. One of the people enduring the night in Kharkiv is Maria Avdeeva. She spoke to us from the hallway of her apartment, away from any windows. Maria, what is your worst fear for your city and for Ukraine?
For the city, my worst fear is that Putin is actually started war against civilians, and they are going to destroy the city. And that for now, that looks like that, because they are for 2 days they are constantly now bombarding the residential areas, and people do not have any supplies of food, medicine, fresh water, and they are also targeting infrastructure in the city, meaning that there will be probably no heating, no electricity.
Maria, we've seen so many pictures of people in Ukraine willing to take up arms and to fight. What are you thinking about yourself and your own future?
It's kind of feeling of resistance, which reminds me what was going on in Europe during the Nazi occupation, when people saw everyone stand up and did what they can, because that was the only way to survive. That is how I feel now. If I do not stand up with others and we do not fight, then Putin will destroy Ukraine. We are fighting here fiercely because that's our land, and we will stand here because we have nowhere to go.
Maria Avdeeva in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Thank you. Associated Press reporter Joe Federman is in the capital of Ukraine. Joe, you've been there for nearly a week now. Does tonight feel different, more ominous?
Absolutely. There's a sense almost that the walls are closing in on this city. Just a few moments ago, we heard 4 loud explosions. It came a couple of hours after a missile strike on a TV antenna inside the city. That's one of the first Russian attacks on locations in the city. The city itself, central Kyiv, very tense today. Not only are the streets empty, which has been the case for several days, but heavy security presence. Lots of checkpoints as we try to move around. So there's really a sense of dread. And then in addition to that, you have this military convoy just on the outskirts of town, about 15 miles outside of the city. So really a sense of dread as the attacks are coming in from all directions.
And Joe, I know Russia warned people in Kyiv to leave their homes if they're anywhere near communication and military facilities. But do you have a sense of what is being hit?
Yes, this missile strike struck an antenna used by the Ukrainian national television station, and that antenna serves other TV stations, and it disrupted transmissions. So Russia apparently thinks of this as a strategic asset. They want to disrupt communications. They probably want to send a message. This is a very symbolic target, and they're going to continue to go after sites like that. But it's important to note that these strikes are not always accurate, and Russia has also been hitting civilian targets. Right nearby this antenna, for example, Ukraine's National Holocaust Memorial also struck.
President Zelenskyy has said he is Russia's #1 target. He's still in Kyiv. He did an interview from there today. What do we know about his situation, his safety tonight?
We know very little. They have been very cagey, very secretive about his movements, about troop movements, about the movements of the leaders. But he does manage to come out and make statements, and some of these statements have been right outside of his offices. So he appears to be in the capital. As you know, he has rejected calls and offers to leave to safer places. So he is sticking by his people.
All right. Joe Federman with the Associated Press in Kyiv tonight. Thanks. U.S. intelligence has given this assessment of the Russian invasion. It's estimated the convoy nearing Kyiv is 64 kilometers long, much longer than first thought. U.S. officials also believe Russia has sent about 80% of the troops that had amassed at the border into Ukraine, and it thinks more than 400 Russian missiles have now been fired at Ukrainian targets. The U.S. also says the offensive on Kyiv has stalled, and there's evidence of Russian units surrendering without a fight and running out of food and fuel. Today, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly said Canada will petition the International Criminal Court to investigate alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the Russian military in Ukraine. Jackson Proskow has the latest on the international response.
Draped in the blue and yellow of Ukraine, the European Parliament heard President Volodymyr Zelensky's emotional plea for his country to join the EU. The European Union is going to be much stronger with us, he said. Without you, Ukraine is going to be all alone. It's clear the West is on his side. The EU voted overwhelmingly to accept Ukraine's application for membership.
We will overcome and we will prevail. We are united and we stay united.
While in Geneva, delegates to the UN Human Rights Commission walked out on Russia's foreign minister, leaving him to address an empty room.
Minister Lavrov was being broadcasted and giving his version, which is false, about what is happening in Ukraine.
In a further act of isolation, the U.S. now believes Russia should lose its seat at the table with the Human Rights Commission. Other nations have suggested expelling Russia from the UN Security Council.
If President Putin succeeds in his stated goal of toppling Ukraine's democratically elected government, the human rights and humanitarian crises will only get worse.
Let's go! All the while, NATO's forces continue their buildup and training on its eastern flank, as commitments for Western sanctions and military and humanitarian aid continue to grow. Yet solidarity also extends to the firm limits of Western resolve. A NATO-enforced no-fly zone remains unlikely. Plans to provide Ukraine with fighter jets are no longer on the table. Both measures seen as too risky for NATO forces. Tonight, the world will be watching Washington closely as President Joe Biden delivers his first State of the Union address. The speech is likely to send strong signals about how far the U.S. is willing to go for Ukraine. In one unmistakable sign, the First Lady's guest of honor is Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. Dawna?
All right, Jackson in Washington, thanks. For some insight into the military strategy, I spoke with retired U.S. Air Force General Hawk Carlyle. He's in Washington. General, from a military and strategic perspective, what do you make of the Russian attacks on targets in Kyiv?
Strategically, he's trying to back NATO down, which I think he got exactly opposite of what he expected. He wants to move NATO away from his borders. He's getting exactly the opposite. If you look at what's happening in the Baltic states and on the eastern flank of NATO. So, you know, that's the part strategically right now that to me is very concerning.
At what point do you think the West moves from helping Ukraine with self-defense by providing weapons to actually providing defense?
Yeah, that's a tough call. I mean, if you look at the world leaders and you look at where NATO is, and they really want to get to the defense of Ukraine. They really believe it because they can't allow this to go unanswered. Certainly for other authoritarian regimes like Xi Jinping, it would be catastrophic to allow this to stand. But they're doing everything in their power to do it via other means. And frankly, if you look at where things are going, they're having some level of success by supporting Ukraine with supplies and capability. They're bolstering the Ukrainian defense. And again, I think Mr. Putin underestimated the Ukraine. You know, I think the Western powers and the leaders of the Western countries in NATO are doing everything in their power to not give him an excuse by putting NATO troops into Ukraine or NATO capability, actual NATO fighting in Ukraine, but still having the same impact of helping defend Ukraine while at the same time diminishing Russia.
General, you know NATO carried out airstrikes during the Kosovo War in 1999. They did that without UN approval because it was a humanitarian intervention at the time to stop the slaughter of ethnic Albanians. What is different in 2022 in Ukraine?
In this case, you have an evil strategist like Mr. Putin that has nuclear weapons, has chemical, biological weapons. And so it's a different context. And of course, and we're 20 years later. It's a different world that we live in. 1999, China was not the power that they are today. There wasn't the challenges in other parts of the world as well. So, you know, I think it's just a different scenario today with Ukraine. And I think what the leaders in the West and NATO are doing is trying to do everything they can short of giving Putin a context to attack other parts of NATO, especially the Baltic states, which I think would be Moldova and the Baltic states, I think would be his next targets.
Retired U.S. Air Force General Hawk Carlyle, thanks. There is other news to get to on this Tuesday. Coming up, the two provinces dropping most public health restrictions. Public health restrictions continue to be eased across Canada. You will no longer need to show proof of vaccination in some indoor places in many provinces. Saskatchewan and Alberta have gone even further, lifting nearly every COVID restriction. Heather Yurex-West on Alberta's plans to be open for spring.
As of midnight last night, Alberta has lifted basically all of the remaining public health restrictions that were in place.
The sense of déjà vu is strong because Alberta has been here before. And of course, things then didn't go so well. Under the weight of the Delta wave and a summer free of restrictions, Alberta's intensive care units nearly collapsed.
In late July, early August of 2021, we had 90 patients in hospital with COVID and 19 in the ICU. Now, we currently have over approximately 1,200 people in hospital, in the 60s in the ICU.
Still, Dr. Daniel Gregson does not believe the Open for Spring plan will result in the same stress, though he does expect hospital numbers will climb.
If you look what's going on in Denmark, which is one of the countries our government is lauding for removing restrictions, their hospital rates per million have gone up by about 25-30% in the last 2 weeks.
My son is, we call it medically complex.
For families like the Watanabes, this is an anxious time. A COVID infection for their little boy could lead to a lengthy hospital stay.
I feel defeated. I feel completely defeated. I don't know what else we can do. I'm sure we will wear masks for as long as we feel comfortable doing it.
Alberta is also planning to strip municipalities of the power to put their own public health rules in place, accusing cities of playing politics.
I would think that the premier is going to be more influenced by politics than municipalities, given that they have just been re-elected or elected, whereas he is facing division with his own party, a leadership review, and an upcoming election.
There is a lot at stake, with little patience left for missteps after 2 years and 5 punishing waves of this pandemic. Heather Yurex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Canadian troops in Latvia ahead NATO's plan to counter Russian aggression. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but many of its neighbors are, and they are all on edge. Collective defense is at the heart of NATO. An attack on one member country is considered an attack on all. And as Eric Sorensen reports, Canadian forces in Latvia are busy preparing.
Canadian forces have been leading a NATO mission in Latvia for almost 5 years, but it's more clear than ever how perilous and important that mission may be. The stakes are magnified in Latvia, bordering a country that is not only waging war, but has become more unpredictable.
A bunch of assumptions about how Russia, how Putin in particular might behave over the last couple of years are being upended basically on every day.
Latvia is not just Russia's neighbor. Like Ukraine, Latvia and the Baltic countries of Estonia and Lithuania were once members of the Soviet Union, ruled by Moscow. About a quarter of the population of Latvia is Russian by background. And like Ukraine, Latvia also borders Belarus, Russia's staunch military partner. What is going to happen to us if Ukraine is surrendered easily, says this Latvian resident. We used to be part of the USSR, this woman says. She feels the threat. It's why Canada is sending more troops to Latvia. 460 armed forces personnel, starting this month with artillery guns. The frigate HMCS Halifax and an Aurora surveillance aircraft are also being sent.
NATO's mission in the Baltics is deterrence. Russia respects strength, and that's what NATO is trying to demonstrate in their eastern flank countries like Latvia.
Latvia is convinced that its membership in NATO is what will hold Russia at bay.
That other our allies, starting from Canadians and ending with other Europeans, are with us, is a good signal that Putin don't mess with us.
It's a measured response on part of Canada in terms of the number of troops we're sending, but it's a meaningful one to go and enhance the deployment that we already have there.
While Latvia enjoys NATO protection, who can be sure of Vladimir Putin's next move these days?
He has surprised us. Everyone has said we don't believe he will do this, and he has. So we have to be on guard.
And being on guard is the Canadian mission in Latvia. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Next, beyond words, how Ukraine's pleas to the world are being translated. That is Global National for this Tuesday. If there is one man who embodies the fight in Ukraine, it is the country's president. Today, Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the European Parliament in Ukrainian. His words so stirring, even the translator got choked up. We leave you tonight with part of that speech and a warning: some of the images we're about to show you are troubling.
We are fighting just for our land and for our freedom. Despite the fact that all large cities of our country are now blocked, nobody is going to enter and intervene with our freedom and country. And believe you me, every square of today, no matter what it's called, it's going to be called, as today, Freedom Square.
10 minutes before the speech by President Zelenskyy, I saw the video with his two explosions on the Freedom Square in Kharkiv. And, you know, when he started talking about this, the message was so powerful, and it's also very personal for me. It's a message that comes not from a faraway land or faraway city. It's a message coming from the city that is very, very much the place close to my heart.